Presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
There we go. And chat window, activate. Computer, run file.
I found a few matches for that. Did you mean X-Files?
Computer, stop.
All right.
Oh dear. Will I remember my password here? Get onto the chat. Click every picture with motorcycles.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms, all danceable.
I think I just clicked the motorcycles wrong. I'll be on the chat in a second, everybody.
And first of all, one of Irving Berlin's greatest hits, Blue Skies.
Click all the squares with parking meters. Because you're not following leaders over here. There we go. Now I'm in the chat. Hey, Bridget and Mary Jo. Hey, Eileen and Larry. Hey, Patricia. Hey to everybody. Hey, Casey, Marita, Patricia, Georgia. Hey, Leah. I've been celebrating today. It's a good day to sing Dianu, eh? Ah, ahoy, Susan. Hey, Donna. Hey, Susan. A lot of Susans in a row. That happens sometimes. Welcome along, one and all. Nope, no sweater tonight. I could actually kind of use one. It's chilly in here. Hey, Kendra. Hey, David. Hey, Tracy. Hey, Jordana. Hey, Dad. Hey, Mona. Hey, Leah. Oh, good luck, Leah. Hey, Octavio. Yep, Trump indicted, Pat dead. Voting rights, victory. I had some really good ice cream, and now I'm having a pretty good old-fashioned. Dianu, Dianu. Hey, Gladys. I saw one guy saying, wait a minute, I've been out for a run. Is there some news that requires a martini? I didn't even know which one he was talking about. Hey, that's your Lily. Miles. Lily is fully moved in now. Hey, Mary in Nashville. Thanks, Luann. Heather, we sure did. Hey, Eleanor. Hey, gang. Did you all see on the Electric Mayhem show, Janice's followers call themselves the Fershurians? Well, hey, Mary, happy birthday.
Benny Goodman presents Helen Ward singing With All My Heart.
Hey, Joanne. Actually, slightly nervous about today's tour. I haven't done this one in a while. I may be a little bit rusty. Hey, Steve, Charlie, in Oak Park. Hey, Grandma Bell. Union Jean. Aha. Evening, everybody. Where are my cats? Oh, I see you, Lily. Lily is sitting in the window. Greetings, Danielle. Hey, Tracy. Hey, Jean. For I am yours sincerely with all my heart. All my heart. Hey, Ann Jordan. New York looks like Kansas before the tornado comes. So everybody drink up. You gotta catch up. Can't fly on one wing. Hey, Lisa. You know who can probably tell you when to duck for the bridges? Hudson the Duck. I'm silly tonight. Well, yeah, every year there is a thing where they release thousands of rubber ducks into the Chicago River. And the crews and the tour boats just kind of scoop them up in nets. I always tell people it's a very specific type of duck that comes to the Chicago River to mate.
Way back and gets a lot of rhythm out of Walk, Jenny Walk. Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
Hey, Diane. We are groovy, aren't we? Oh yeah, I'm feeling silly tonight. I probably should have done this one on Epping, Chicago tonight. Hey, Lily. Hey, Paula. Hey, Lynn, I'm glad to have you while we can. Hey, Arlie, it is a good day. Also a Pat Robertson Yarzite in the future. Hey, Joanne. Hey, Paula. Hey, Lemond. There's happy indictment, happy voting rights, happy legal edibles, today and every day. Happy Pat Robertson, ding dong the man. When I announced that at the coffee shop this morning, it was like we practically broke into that first song from Wicked. We're going to let Benny Goodman do one more song, and then we'll get started properly, and hope that I remember everything. I'm a little bit maybe a little bit rusty.
They all loved those bastards when they played by Benny Goodman.
I may have thought that gummy would have worn off quite some time ago. Hey, what cat just hopped around here? No, I heard one. Oh, Lily just walked by. Alright, well, we'll make sure the cats make an appearance by the end of the night. And I haven't seen Miles yet. Yep, Alabama has to redo their districts. It's just like the good news just kept coming in today. Like Dianu. He's not over the documents he took to Mar-a-Lago. It's the documents he wouldn't give back, and then pretended he had given back when he hadn't, etc., etc. And all because he wanted them for their collectible value or something? I really do want the cast to show up right about now. Miles! And Miles is on the bed. He'll be around. Hey, Christy.
Music by Benny Goodman is being presented from the
Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. I believe that means it's time we get started properly. Hey, look who's here. Everybody, look. This is Lily. Lily moved in a couple weeks ago. She doesn't love being picked up, but that is the most she will let anybody pick her up right there. I didn't think she'd ever let me pick her up like that. But no, she's just, frankly, a bad influence on the other cats. She's taught them to beg at the table and how to get up and get the leftovers before we can put them away. I'm deeply upset about this. But she is a very sweet cat, and she has gotten used to being here very quickly. The others are quite used to her by now. So, all right, Aaron, welcome back. So, welcome, everybody. So, welcome. It's a kind of a day when I am rather buzzing and more than a little bit buzzed than I usually have for these tours. I probably should have done tonight on effing Chicago. But, you know, I do these ones to kind of to stay in practice, partly because they're fun and partly because I really just haven't done a boat tour probably in... Did I do this one virtually again since Mystericon? I can't remember for sure if I did. In any case, we'll find out. I may be a little bit rusty. But let's see here. Here we are. We'll start out right at Navy Pier, right where various of the boat tour companies do. Heading past Ogden Slip and DuSable Harbor. Now, DuSable Harbor right here is named after Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable, Chicago's first permanent non-native settler. This might be what he looks like. Maybe not also. It was drawn years and years after he had left the vicinity, and probably not by somebody who had ever seen him. We don't really know much about Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable, really. He's thought to have been a fur trader from Haiti. Other people believe he might have been a pirate on the run from the Caribbean, or even possibly somebody who escaped from slavery down south. We really just don't know. But in any case, he now has this harbor named after him. He lived here back in the 1770s. Now, by 1838, when we officially became a city here in Chicago, we were up to a population of about 3,000 people. There's an outstanding legend saying that when they incorporated as a city, they needed 150 votes, but only 100 people showed up, so 50 of them just got back in line. It's the kind of story people like to tell about Chicago that doesn't really happen to be true. Maybe it should be, but in fact it is not. But even some of the wilder stories, when you look them up, you find out they are at least a little bit closer to the truth than you might have thought, like some of the stories about where the land here came from. Now, the land on the left, a lot of that, I'm backwards here. Land on your left-hand side, if you took a look over to the left-hand side of the ship, is rubble from after the Great Chicago Fire. Lake Michigan used to go all the way out to Michigan Avenue, which is a good couple more bridges from here. That changed when they started dumping all of the rubble from the fire in to create Grant Park and everything that is now behind your head as we face this direction. The land that we're about to pass now was created by Captain George Wellington Streeter, Chicago's pirate king. According to his version of the story, he crashed his houseboat onto the shore in 1888, started charging people money to dump their garbage around his ship, until he had created this 186-acre landfill that we are now sailing right past. And being a bit of an eccentric, he decided that not only did he own this new land he had created, but it was his own country of which he was the emperor. Now, most of his story is really just him forging a bunch of documents, but it took the cops 30 years to get rid of the guy. And it wasn't just a legal battle either. He had a whole army of hobos who were ready to fight back. People actually died in these fights. He finally did lose the Battle of Garbage Hill in about 1918 or so, about 30 years after it started. Ended up selling coffee at what is now Navy Pier, was then Municipal Pier for the rest of his life. But there's now a statue of him just behind these buildings, a life-size statue of Captain George Wellington Streeter. So that's what we do with our criminals and pirates here in Chicago. We make statues of them, or put their name on buildings. So to put a couple of things in perspective, at the time Captain Streeter crashed his houseboat onto the shore, we suddenly had about 1 million people in the city. You might think we would be a logical place to be the first modern skyscraper. We're not that logical if you look at the land around here. It's a very wet, marshy soil. Older buildings used to have much wider walls because they're load-bearing walls holding up the whole thing, like the Murdoch Building. The walls are like 6 feet thick. But we solved that in Chicago. The architect William LeBaron Jenney developed steel frame construction, where you just build a skeleton for the building out of steel. All the rest of this stuff is just draped over it like a curtain. That allowed him to build the first modern skyscraper anywhere, this one right here, the Home Insurance Building in the 1880s. 10 stories high. Will not be appearing on today's tour because it was torn down in the 30s. Depending on who you believe, anyway. There are those who say that it was in fact destroyed by dinosaurs. It's all about what they want you to think, you know. As we sail down around here, we actually can do a fairly decent Architecture 101. Off in the distance, we can see a bit of an example of one that is arguably the Beaux-Arts style of architecture. This one's more based on a Spanish cathedral. It's very fancy, late 19th century, the type of buildings with a whole lot of columns in them. Eventually, we moved on to Art Deco from that. That's more streamlined verticality, simple geometric art. To the right, you can see the Chicago Tribune Tower. That's the Gothic-style skyscraper. And after Art Deco, which you can see a bit of here at the NBC Tower, now appearing behind the curtain, as it were. Then they got into modernism, plain black rectangle buildings that were all the rage in the 20s when the idea was less is more, less is more. And then, of course, we moved on to internationalism, which is kind of like modernism, only less elegant. You know, uglier. We just passed a couple of international school buildings over on the right. I don't have this properly timed to the virtual tour exactly anymore, but we'll do what we can. Everybody make sure you are ducking under the bridges here. I don't want anybody getting hurt today. Just below me right now, the London Guarantee Building by Samuel Altshuler that we'll talk about in a little more detail later on. But here you can see some examples of modernism, the plain black rectangle style that we associate with the architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Just beyond that, you can see a little bit more Art Deco with 333 North Michigan. But now we're going to move on just past the International Fidelity Building here and talk about the first really marquee skyscraper in this area that is now the Magnificent Mile. Coming up over here on the left, this is the Wrigley Building, 1920 Graham Anderson Probst and White. Now in 1920, this was not the Magnificent Mile yet. Michigan Avenue above the river was a dirt road known as Pine Street. But now that Captain Streeter was finally gone, now that they had built the bridge at Michigan Avenue, everybody knew that this was going to become the Magnificent Mile, one of the premier shopping destinations in the world. And everybody was kind of wondering what it was going to be like. New York was already Times Square was already just a buzz to that point where it felt like you were in a commercial for something you didn't want. William Wrigley Jr. announced he was going to be building the first skyscraper here, and everybody thought, well, William Wrigley Jr., the gum guy. Now, what's made him so rich isn't just his gum, it's his advertising. He's probably going to have a giant billboard like one of his ones in Times Square, and that'll set the tone for the Magnificent Mile. So, everybody kind of joked about Chicago's new monument to Spearmint, so we were surprised and delighted when William Wrigley Jr. said, no, I don't want a big advertisement on mine, just a small plaque that says Wrigley Building, nothing more. The simplest, most elegant office building in the world, and we loved him for it. The Chicago Tribune praised him to the sky for not putting his name on the building in giant letters like some hoodlum. And other architects liked it so much they kept on building buildings just that would fit in with the Wrigley Building, like the London Guarantee and Mather Tower back there, which are built specifically to fit in with the Wrigley Building, even though that style was already going out of date by then. That's something architects do have to think about, is how is my building going to fit in with the others? Like when Adrian Smith was designing 400 North Wabash here, he had to figure out, how am I going to make this fit in when it's so much taller than everything else? He did this with a lot of little architectural tricks called contextualism. It's a way that architects can kind of collude with the built environment. Well, for instance, this setback over here on the left that is currently covering up the building back behind it is set at the same height as that building. The other setbacks are set at the heights of other buildings nearby, which creates the illusion that the buildings all fit together, at least kind of subtly suggests it. It's a very clever trick, but Adrian Smith is a very clever architect. Just behind it, now coming into view, the old IBM building, now the AMA building from the late 1960s by the architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, the kind of style that we specifically associate with him, these plain black boxes. He wanted his buildings to be a new kind of cathedral for a new kind of religion, that religion being commerce. Other architects were still putting bricks on things. He still wanted to emphasize the simple beauty of the raw materials. He would stand in front of his students and say, "Behold, the brick." Only in a much thicker German accent than I can possibly fake and get away with if it's not a Johann Hochtor. Just beyond that, Marina City by one of his students, Bertrand Goldberg, who believed in most of the tenets of modernism, but he didn't like all of the rectangles, as you can see. He is often quoted as saying there are no right angles in nature, so we shouldn't have them in architecture either. I doubt he actually said that offhand. He does have plenty of buildings that are full of plain right angles, like the Astor Building and that school up by Wrigley Field. But he does have a lot of these curving ones, too. These ones specifically he built in the 1960s to be the buildings of the future. They would be like a city within a city. Rumor even has it that they were built for flying cars to go into, which is one of those things that I don't think anybody really believes is true, but it does, you could park your flying car right in there. These were thought of as the most modern buildings in the world at the time that they were built. There was a bowling alley right in, there were offices, there was a grocery store right inside of the building. You never had to leave. Trouble is, these concrete buildings are not really made for cell phone coverage. But his use of all of that concrete ties it in to Bruteism, the style that was really hot at the time it was being built, in the 1960s and 70s, and still a little bit on into the 80s too. Like a very restrained example right here is 55 Whacker by Otto Stark, who happens to be my next door neighbor right now, though I've seen him like twice in all the years that I've lived here now. 55 Whacker, also known as the hashtag building or the pound sign building, depending on how old you are. Now, this is a very restrained example of Bruteism. Usually when we think of Bruteism, we think of these big, like, Logan's Run looking buildings, like shopping malls from the 70s, parking garages from the 60s, these big hulking slabs of concrete that were all the rage at the time, and all of a sudden are popular again. I used to joke that was one trend that was never coming back, but no. All of a sudden, it's cool to say that you like Bruteism again. Let's all have a drink. Here's the Reed Murdoch Building from early 1910s. Best example of the Prairie School of architecture on the Chicago River right now. Now, one thing prairie school architects like to do, besides emphasizing the horizontal over the vertical, was little hints about what the building did on the inside. There are these little decorations here that are supposed to look like Art Deco wheat shafts. It was a grocery warehouse then. They lopped off part of the building when they added in the LaSalle Street Bridge here. Now, underneath that, there didn't used to be a bridge at LaSalle. It used to be that there was a tunnel under there. It was originally a pedestrian tunnel built right before the Great Chicago Fire underneath the river. That became one of the great escape routes from the city during the Great Chicago Fire in 1871. By the 1950s, they were using it for streetcars. Which have now been replaced entirely by the trains and the buses, of course. But that tunnel is probably still down there. It's been filled with damp sand since the 1950s. But we have tunnels all over the city. There's a network of old brick tunnels in the Gold Coast that were used for aging beer in the summertime. There's about 60 miles of freight tunnels underneath the loop. And now the Merchandise Mart, 1930, Graham Anderson Probst and White, the wholesale showroom for Marshall Fields. At least that was what it was built for. It was one of the largest buildings in the world when it was built. It had its own zip code. It does have about the same square footage as the Sears Tower. These things out front that look like the busts of like giant Pez dispensers, they are busts of the giants of merchandising, guys like Marshall Field himself. Not only did I always wish you could make them talk, like put a quarter in a slot, but I wish Samuel Kresge from Kmart was out there. So you could put a quarter in a slot and go, "Attention Kmart shoppers. There is a blue light special on underpants in aisle 12. And we'd all get trampled going to aisle 12. Kind of showing my age there, huh? We will slip our way underneath the bridge. There's a little patch of land here called Wolf Point where the two branches of the river come together. This new building is called Wolf Point East. Wolf Point West is over there, and now since this was filmed, they've made a lot of progress right here on Wolf Point South. This is just solid buildings right here, right now. And I love that they're calling these the Wolf Point buildings, because Wolf Point is what the old pioneers used to call this patch of land. Some of the early people to start building things here in Chicago. And of course, when this was downtown, building things meant log cabins for the most part. Why they call it Wolf Point is kind of lost to history, but probably just a reference to the fact that there were so many wolves in the environment. They used to have a holiday in the 1840s. They would, every year in the 1840s, they would shut down all the businesses one day in the winter so people could help chase wolves out of the woods and out into the ice on the lake. I think they only ever got one of them. But that was their idea of a holiday back then. Not unlike Weasel Stomping Day. Most famous place was Mark Bulbine's Saguenash Hotel, where he would say, "I keep the tavern like hell and play the fiddle like the devil," and would charge you $1 if you wanted a blanket. Clean laundry would have been in short supply and high demand in those days. We don't really think about how hard it must have been to get clean laundry right around here, but it would have been. Like, they had to be, the little things like that we don't always think of, like how hard it was to get ice back then when it wasn't wintertime. Cold storage used to require a lot of creativity. Take this pink building that is coming up right here. This is the old North American Cold Storage Mart. One of the oldest buildings that we see on the river. When it was built to keep things cool in there, they didn't have any windows. The walls you can see in some of the cutouts are about 3 feet thick. And those walls were stuffed with frozen horsehair, frozen cork, and a kind of ammonia and brine mixture that would pump through the place as a coolant. Now, when Harry Weiss, the architect, decided he wanted to turn it into condos and lofts in the 70s, he first had to haul out 500 train car loads of frozen horsehair. Then he had to air the place out for about a year and thaw it out. And then he had to add all of the windows and add all these bracings to hold it up. It would have been a lot easier, not to mention cheaper, just to tear the building down and put up a new one. But Harry Weiss just wasn't that kind of guy. He was a very preservation-minded architect. They used to say, don't stand next to Harry Weiss for 5 whole minutes at once. Otherwise, he might have you declared a landmark. And then you'll have to get a public hearing every time you change your haircut. And now we will all duck down in deep respect for your passing under the bridge, at which point the Dave Matthews Band's tour bus once stopped and decided to relieve themselves of all of their sewage onto the passing bus below. We remember I was not there that dreadful day, but we remember. Can you believe the students I had last week asked me if I was old enough to remember 9/11? I suppose I should be flattered, and I am. We'll flip around right here, passing the Kinsey townhouses over on the right. And it was kind of a gamble back in 2000 when they built these. They just weren't really sure that people were quite ready to move back onto the river. The river had such a reputation for being smelly and polluted and disgusting for years and years and years. We were down to like 2 species of fish still lived in the river. But now we got quite a few more. They have done a great job of cleaning it up over the last 20 or 30 years. Now I'll move forward. This is a bridge that we will definitely be ducking under here. As I just know if I ever lose my head on one of these bridges, it's going to be the Dave Matthews Band Poop Bridge. That'll be my legacy. I will be the headless tour guide ghost on all of the goat tours that shows up on the Poop Bridge. Why, you can almost hear me singing Gravedigger, the Dave Matthews song I like. Let's proceed forward. Now, Harry Weiss, the architect, also designed these river cottages. He wasn't just a preservation guy. Now, these were supposed to look like the sailboats and schooners they used to sail up towards Wolf Point back in the old days. And back in the 70s when they were built, back in the late 80s, early 90s when they were built, it was very bold to be having residential stuff on the river. But he'd had enough success with the Fulton Lofts over there. Only a couple of them have ever sold again. I think just the one, unless one of them has gone up since, and I might have missed it. But I love it when we get real estate listings of these things, so we can actually see pictures of what they look like on the inside. These ones I think are probably kind of bland on the inside. They look like corporate housing. But mansionettes down below, condos up top at River Bend. The middle section is a parking garage. But it's such a narrow space, they have elevators that get the cars at the different level instead of going around and around and around as you would in other parking garages. Now, car elevators are something we've been experimenting with in Chicago since about the 1920s. You know, we've got an awful lot of people crammed into a very small space here. When you do that, you have to get kind of creative just to make everything work. And we want to make it work, but also with style. Form ever follows function, but it doesn't have to be left in the dust. Over on the right, these things that look like portholes are pumping out diesel exhaust fumes from the railroad tracks that are hidden behind the walls over here. A lot of these buildings are built on what's called air rights. The railroads sold the rights to the airspace over the tracks for people to build on. You just had to still let the train go through, which was no easy task, but they did it over and over and over again. And speaking of difficult architectural and engineering feats, right ahead of us is 750 North Riverside, or 150 North Riverside, by Getch Partners, just an addition to the skyline in the last decade or so that looks like it's got a giant wedge chopped out of it. This is what is called a core-supported structure. That stone portion that you see in the middle there is really the only part of the footprint that they really had to work with on the ground. After that, there are some regulations about how that you have to have a river walk, that you can only go so far away before you get to the road. That was all they had to work with, so they came up with the idea to build up until they were out of everything's way, then flare outward and create their own space up in the sky. Core-supported structures like this are not something that you see every day. They're not brand new. Harry Weiss did one in the 70s, but they don't usually go 700 feet tall like this. Most cities, this would be the tallest building in the skyline to this day. Up on the top is what is known as a liquid-tuned mass dampers. You might have heard that tall buildings are known to sway in the wind a little bit. Officially, they don't sway. What they do is give. But that means the same thing. So the liquid-tuned mass damper is a giant tank of water that's built so when the wind blows one way, the water will flow the other to keep everything steady. Ingenious feat of engineering, really. But also, it's such basic physics, it's like something Aristotle might have come up with. Or Newton, at least. I only know who these guys are from, like, Mind Game toys. All right, the Boeing Building, formerly the Morton Salt Building from the early 1990s, a little bit of postmodern architecture. After we got tired of modernism, we moved on to postmodernism, which was a theory that we made up as we go along. You can call practically anything postmodern and get away with it. But here, this is another air rights building. They've got the train tracks hidden behind the bushes there. The smaller portion of it is over the part of the tracks that doesn't, where the tracks cross over each other. That doesn't leave as much room as they would normally have for support beams and columns right where they want them. So it's actually being held up by steel trusses. We're under the Washington Boulevard Bridge right now, named after Frederick Boom Boom Washington of the Sweat Hogs. All right. So Aristotle. Who am I thinking of who did the thing with the bathtub? The laws of displacement. You'll notice I got bad grades in chemistry. We're moving on now to... Also, that's not chemistry. I know. Moving on to Riverside Plaza. This is the old Chicago Daily News building. The plaza here was a popular location for mugging people back in the 1940s, at least according to the book Knock on Any Door, which is a really good book. Live fast, die young, and have a good-looking corpse. Archimedes, there we go. I'd like to shake Archimedes' hand. I'd really shake it good. They call Archimedes the father of school, so I'd kill him if I could. Tape some thumbtacks to my palm, walk up and say, "Yo, Archimedes." Then I'd grab his hand with mine and watch as he started to bleed. I hope you're listening, Archimedes, who we've got tortures worse than hemlock nowadays, so I'd beat town if I were you, or I'll find you, I will make you pay. Might as well rehash poems that I wrote in 7th grade rather than talk about modernism, right? Riverview 1 and Riverview 2, 1960s, Graham Anderson Probst in white, utterly copying the style of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, whose philosophy they followed so carefully that Frank Lloyd Wright called Skidmore, Owings, and Merrell the Three Blind Mice. Off at the distance, we can see what they came up with next, which is Riverview 3 from the 1970s. Here they start to shake things up and decide to add a different color. Instead of a black box, they've done a white box, also known as architecturally uninspiring. Well, you can see the Skidmore, Owings, and Merrell is at least starting to shake things up a little bit. And right beyond that, you can see Riverview 4, where they started to have pure glass and bend around a bit to reflect the skyline. That is their first foray into postmodernism. Also, you can see here these bridge houses. There used to be bridge tenders who had to work about raising the bridges. And usually they did not, in fact, need 4 bridge houses, but a lot of the river spots just have 4 bridges just for symmetry purposes. Now, right ahead of us, this small black one, the Chicago Tribune once described as a small black rectangle, heavily strapped with steel cables, as though we were holding in something volatile, something that had to be contained, or else it would explode. Which is a good description of what used to go on in there. It was a commodities trading room for a while. Guys like yelling and screaming at each other over oat, corn, and barley deals. Like doing business in a hurricane. It's all computerized now, but probably not quite as much fun. It's now a bakery and a gym, which is convenient. Right ahead of us, I used to point out this one as a good example of bad modernism. In a good Mies van der Rohe modernist building, you can never see the seams, you can never see the screws. It's endlessly elegant. Here you can see all of those things, and originally the elevator shaft was topped with just this plain beige slab of cement. But they got tired of being referred to in the press as conspicuously dull, so they added this design element. And this design is a map of the Chicago River. The red dot there is the "You Are Here" portion. So we could plot out exactly where we're going and figure out where the H&M is. We believe in Camera. There's a view. This is not as wild as postmodern buildings sometimes get over here at Riverview 4, but for Skidmore, Owings, and Merrell, in those days especially, pretty wild. Now coming up on the right, a building that I honestly thought might be cursed for a while. This is the old Chicago post office. When they built this place, it was top of the line, Art Deco, largest post office anywhere. Below was an air rights building. Trains could pick up the mail right underneath the post office. That just blew people away. There were even experiments with auto gyros up on the roof to go back and forth between the post office and the airport, early versions of helicopters. But by the 1960s, they thought the place had really outlived its usefulness. Technology had gone rolling along. So in the 90s, they built a newer, more modern post office, but certainly less architecturally inspiring. And this one sat empty for a good 20 years. It has now finally been refurbished and rehabbed and re-inhabited. The Bain Construction Company took it over. Uber's got a big presence in there. And up on the roof is a park that I haven't gotten into yet. Most of these places I've managed to talk my way into at one point or another. There's just a couple of them that are still kind of holdouts on me. See you, Laura. But it was kind of a surprise, really, that they went for all offices at all, because there's been such a movement toward residential stuff at the time. It's cooled off now that more people are staying home to work, but for a while the big thing was at least mixed use, places that were mostly residential but also some retail and restaurant places. They were even saying for a while, and even saying again now that with so many people just staying home and not needing to come downtown, they say that rents downtown are going to start going down. If that in fact happens, I will be as pleased as I have been watching the news all day today, but I'm not holding my breath on that one. But mixed use was all the rage for a while there. It's like a little further down is the Roosevelt Collection. We'll see that in a second. At the Roosevelt Collection, in fact, let's skip to the Roosevelt Collection now. We'll see the rest of this as we go. The Roosevelt Collection is a movie theater, mall shops, and apartments in an architectural style known as developer modernism. Awfully bland. But there are similar developments going up all over. Movie theaters, mall shops, and apartments. It's kind of like 1980 science fiction books. They always had people living at the mall in the future. The future is now. But of course, it's really kind of a throwback to Bertrand Goldberg and his concept of a city within a city. If you remember the River City buildings, you might recognize some of his architectural style right up here at the curving building on the right, which is right across the street from the space where a couple of blocks away at least Mrs. O'Leary's place was back in the 1870s, where the Great Chicago Fire began. I've skipped over some of the dead weight portions in the tour, so normally I tell that story at much greater length. There are people who go through a very long string of puns about the Great Chicago Fire, cow-related puns, because of the old myth that Mrs. O'Leary's cow started the whole fire. The stories, of course, are utterly ridiculous. But, of course, there's no use crying over spilled milk. I'll show myself out. Straight ahead of us now, we'll see a couple of other examples of things. I've talked a little bit about postmodernism without showing too many examples, but there are just so many and so wild and varied. Directly in front of us, you can see this one with all of the rectangular balconies over it. Sometimes we call that the Minecraft building, because it looks like something you might build in Minecraft 10 years ago. Other people call it the Morse code building because the dots and dashes of the balconies really do look like Morse code, dots and dashes. It spells out MTRDEE over and over again, which means nothing. That's just what you get when you pull that off. But if you look just to the right of that, you can see this one with the pointy thing and the green roof off in the distance at 190 South LaSalle. That is also postmodernism, with throwbacks to the Tudor-style architecture. One thing that postmodernists like to do was bring back some of the cool old styles now that we had better technology to do it with. We're going through a little mixed-use development right over here, the brand new one that's just come up. Off in the distance, we can see just a little bit of the old Insurance Exchange Building, which is credited to the Daniel Burnham Company. Burnham make no little plans. They have no magic in the stir men's blood. Though like a lot of his later work, the actual design work would have been done by Frederick Dinkelberg, his main designer at the time, and things like the Flatiron Building in New York. But if you look right to the right of 190 LaSalle there, and right to the right of the Insurance Exchange Building, pointing up into the sky with the pyramid on top, this is the Board of Trade Building, very possibly my favorite building in town. The Board of Trade by Holabird and Root, 1930, topped by the statue of Ceres, the Roman goddess of grains and agriculture. Famously does not have a face. Some people like to say that that's because they believe nobody else would ever build another building this high again, so nobody could see the face anyway. And John Story, the sculptor, did say that most people wouldn't be able to see it anyway, though he wasn't so foolish as to think they were never going to build any taller than this. After all, there were already plans afoot in New York for buildings that would hit the 1,000-foot mark. But that was the tallest building in Chicago for a number of years. Right after it was built, the Depression started, then World War II came around. It was a good generation before they started building tall again. And even then, it was a while before they got up to the 1930s heights of the thousands. But right in front of us on the left here, you can see this one with the circular thing on top of it. When that lights up at night, we call it the world's largest White Castle. It is actually known as 311 South Wacker. At the time it was built, it was said to be the tallest building in the world that didn't have a name, just its address. That has been widely taken over. There's so many buildings just in New York alone that are taller than that one and don't have a name right now. 432 Park is probably the most famous and the most hideous. Just behind that, you can see a bit of Adrian Smith's AT&T building, which is also over 1,000 feet. And people don't even really know that building. There's very few cities in the world where there are 1,000-foot tall buildings that nobody really knows or could pick out of a lineup. But right behind that, standing 1,451 feet tall, the Sears Tower, officially known as the Willis Tower, though locals still refer to it as the Sears under penalty of torture. Early 1970s, Skidmore, Owings and Merrell, Fosler Kahn, the engineer, Bruce Graham, the architect. Fosler Kahn, often known as the Einstein of structural engineering. Now, in the 1960s, people had decided that tall buildings, like the size of the Empire State or the Chrysler Building, just weren't cost effective. They weren't getting built for a long time until Fosler Kahn developed the concept of bundled tube construction. The idea is you just bundle several buildings together and they strengthen one another. Like what you're seeing when you look at the Sears Tower is really 9 plain black rectangle buildings, but all bundled together and rising up to different heights like cigarettes coming out of a pack, as Kahn himself described it, though I'm supposed to change that to straws for some companies. That'll keep the kids from smoking for sure. But with these towers, just one of them would not hold up to the wind very well, but by 9 of them bundled together, they make each other stronger. They strengthen each other. They are stronger together. Like America. So, at 1,451 feet tall, this was the tallest building in the world for a good generation or so, which is a really long time for any building to hold that record. Up at the top are the sky ledge, the glass bottom balconies that you can walk out on top of. Now, One World Trade Center is officially taller than it at 1,776 feet, but their sky ledge is you walk over a couple of video screens. It's a great observation deck they got up there overall, but I just had to chuckle at their idea of the sky portal. And also, that 1,776 feet includes the spire. It's a weird little quirk in architectural rules that spires count towards the overall height, antennas do not. When we talk about the Sears as being 1,451 feet tall, that doesn't include the antennas, which take it well over 1,700 feet. Just one of those weird little quirks we can't do anything about. But of course, even if we counted the antennas, it wouldn't be the tallest building in the world anymore. That honor currently goes to the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, which is like this plus another 1,000 feet, 2,700 feet. Spires. And maybe losing its record at the Jeddah Tower in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, if that ever gets completed. It's going to be over 3,000 feet, but it's been stalled for a long time. However, the Central Park Tower in New York has now topped out and is in fact taller than the Sears, even without going to the use of a spire, first building in the States to do that. However, the Burj Khalifa, the Jeddah Tower, and Central Park Tower were all designed by Chicago architect Adrian Smith, so we still win. Right here in Chicago. His office is a few blocks over to the right of where we are right now on LaSalle Street, last I checked. And Adams Street, coming up here, was named after me. I told the last 2 mayors that we needed an apostrophe on there. Neither of them listened. Rahm Emanuel thought my name was Bruce. I don't know why. He just saw me in Target and said, "Hey, Bruce." I had to tell him I'm not Bruce, and that was the great West Loop Target Power Summit right there. All right, this is the old Hartford Insurance Building. Couldn't find too much about it, except I mentioned that sometimes architects like the outside of a building to reflect what goes on inside. Here, the strength of the exterior stone protects the fragility of the interior glass, the same way a Hartford insurance policy protects your fragile life. Maybe. I don't know. Well, this is also Hartford Insurance. I do know before they built this building, when they had their old one that was also destroyed by dinosaurs the same day that the home insurance building was, that was one of the companies H.H. Holmes, the Devil in the White City guy, tried to swindle out of all their money. Though I don't think he got any further with them than he did with most insurance companies. I think it was actually one of his bigger losses at Hartford. They didn't get that mixed up in it. Coming up here, we've got another commodities exchange building with two towers that are really being held in place by the middle section, or they're holding the middle section in place. Without it, they just kind of bend into each other. But when they built this, they didn't want any kind of structural support on the inside. It was a stock trading floor. You had to be able to see people like waving their hands and yelling and screaming. Now, this was built with executives in mind. Normally every executive wants a corner office and you get 4 per floor. In this place, you get something like 16 corner offices per floor. So no one has to feel left out and everybody gets to be a winner. Which I realize always sounds like a great setup for a joke about millennials, but it was for baby boomers. Such an easily offended generation, let me tell you. And Xers. Xers will always tell you that they're impossible to offend. Tell them Animal House isn't that funny. See how it goes. The Civic Opera Building, 1929, Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White, essentially a Beaux-Arts style building on an Art Deco style frame. Now, this was built by a guy by the name of Samuel Insull, who had been involved in the operas for years, and built it knowing specifically that operas did not normally make money. Despite various urban legends about his concept, he wanted a bigger opera house and he wanted it to pay for itself. These two buildings on the side were office towers whose rent money was supposed to keep the opera afloat. But then it opened right after the stock market crash of 1929. Business was still okay for a while. It took a while for the stock market crash to really trickle down to everybody else. But it did. All right. We've got some embraces holding up this new one by Getch Partners. We have finally embraced the embrace. I'll just step away right now. Built over the site of the old General Growth Properties building, which I always kind of liked. It looked like a building in a German expressionist movie that was going to come to life and eat people. And behind that, 123 Whacker by Ralph Johnson Architect made a lot of news by designing it entirely with computers in 1986. And really does look like the kind of building that you would design with a computer in 1986. It's like something Scooter would make on Muppet Babies. One of the questions I get asked the most is just how many Starbucks do we have here? Last I checked, it was like 297. But that's just including the city limits. If you count the suburbs, nobody even knows how many we got here. Jeremy Stoll, who played Phantom on Broadway for years, I just took a bunch of kids to do a workshop with him, also just put out a country song called I've Been to Every Starbucks. Very good song. On our right, the Great Lakes Building by Hullabird and Roche. Couple of guys who came out of the William LeBaron Jenney office and started their own organization. This one is not using what we call the best and tallest possible use of the space. But we hope that one can hang on. It adds a splash of color right at a point where we kind of need it to. And coming up here as we curve around. We curve around, we come to 333 Whacker, the Nuven Building, and this thing that I believe was a postmodern hammock. It looked like this. Actually, a very good example of postmodernism is if you think of that, look at that and think hammock. 333 Whacker, the Nuven Building from the 1980s by Combe Peterson and Fox, the rock stars of 1980s postmodernism, wins a lot of popularity contests and also uses a lot of contextualism to fit in, like the octagon-style bases are about the same shape as the octagons over across the river at the merchandise mart. Circular vents match the circular vents of the building next door. A curve goes right along with the curve of the river. With the two colors of glass there, at least one usually about matches the color of the water as well. Perhaps most famous now, of course, for being the building where Ferris Bueller's dad works in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Beth, I like the Tim Hortons too, but I don't know where there's even one in Chicago. coffee is excellent. And cheap. We shall duck under the bridge here. And to the right, check out a little bit of Hollowbird and Root's old Chicago Daily News building. Well, it was the Daily Times building, then it was the Sun-Times building. The Sun-Times has had several buildings, none of which were any good. And just beyond that a little ways, we've got the Builders Building coming up. Now, what we're also seeing Wacker Drive over here, having a bi-level road, one on the top and then lower Wacker is hidden back behind this wall, was part of Daniel Burnham's plan for Chicago. In addition to being an architect, he was a city planner, published a 1909 plan of Chicago that we didn't follow to the letter, but we did follow a lot of. Burnham is famously used to say, make no small plans. They have no magic in them to stir men's blood, and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans. Aim high in hope and in work. Let's all aim a little bit lower here so we don't hit our heads on the bridge. Now, Burnham was really better remembered as a city planner than he was as an architect for years, until we started writing about the World's Fair of 1893 a lot again. He was in charge of those buildings. They brought back neoclassicalism in a big way. That was a language that all of the architects spoke at the time. So if you look up at the top of this building, the Builders Building, you can see this row of columns, a colonnade of columns here with a colonnaded ruins domino. If you look up in buildings in Chicago, you'll notice that a lot, like rows of columns up towards the top. You don't notice it if you're not looking, but they're everywhere, including at the Marshall Fields that is now the Macy's down on State Street, which also is where Al Capone bought his underpants. We know this from his trial transcript. Union suits that cost him like $20 a pair in 1920s money, made out of ladies' glove silk, which people thought was hilarious for a while there. Here's the LaSalle Wacker Building from 1930 by Hollowbird and Root. I can't trace Capone here, but I can trace his gang here. There was a room they were using as an office a couple of years after Capone went to prison. They were then under the leadership of Frank the Enforcer Nitti, who got shot up by the cops in that building pretty good one grim day in 33. Some say that later when Mayor Cermak was killed, apparently the official story was that the assassin was trying to hit Franklin D. Roosevelt next to him. But others who it was actually revenge for going after Frank the Enforcer Nitti. Fast down here briefly. Off in the distance, the Carbide and Carbon Building. But first, 77 Wacker, the United Building, 1990 to Stefano and Partners, Riccardo Bofill, the architect. Greek-style pediment roof on top, 1990s postmodern take on a row of columns down below that. 4 of the columns extend all the way down, extending the, 6 of the columns extend all the way down, tying the whole building together. Endlessly classical and endlessly modern at the same time. I don't think that one is ever going to go on out of style. Is everybody forgetting to Divac? Coming up right ahead, the Carbide and Carbon Building by Burnham and Burnham, Daniel Burnham's sons, with the green there and the gold on top. The builders, Carbide and Carbon, really did want it to be the color of an old champagne bottle. So we end up with it here is kind of a Art Deco take on a champagne bottle. Built at a time when champagne was not legal. Prohibition was still going on. And nobody in Chicago paid attention. They didn't really pay attention anywhere, of course. But in Chicago in particular, it said that the number of places where you could go to get a drink just about tripled. Hard to know whether that is true or not. These illegal speakeasies were not known for keeping good paperwork, so we do end up with a lot of urban legends about Chicago buildings with speakeasies in them. Any place that used to have a restaurant, they advertise as a former speakeasy. Or the dome under the Jewelers Building here from the 1920s. That's a Fred Dinkelberg joint. People love to say that Al Capone either owned or attended a speakeasy under the dome there called the Stratosphere Club. Now, the Stratosphere Club was in fact real. We've been there on time travel pub crawls, but it wasn't until years after Capone went to prison. And after alcohol was legal again, for that matter. We'll pull ahead here just a second to see a couple of cool buildings on the other side. We've got Mather Tower. Originally, they planned to make 2 of these skinny skyscrapers. But then 1930 happened and they ran out of money. And just beyond that, we've got the London Guarantee Building by Alfred Alschuler. His father, Samuel Alschuler, took the first photograph of Abraham Lincoln with a beard. Now, it's now been renamed the London House after the jazz club that used to be there back in the 50s. You can go on Spotify right after this tour, right after the post-show hang, and right after you hit the Venmo and everything. Look up Sarah Vaughan live after hours at the London House, or Oscar Peterson Trio live at the London House. Beyond that, a better view than we had before of 333 North Wacker by Hollowbird and Root, Art Deco, which is based on the design that came in second when the Chicago Tribune had a contest for who could design their new office tower here. You can see the office tower there, the old Gothic skyscraper of the Chicago Tribune. But popping into the left of it, we'll just talk about briefly. This is the Intercontinental Hotel, formerly the Medina Athletic Club. The building insists that they originally planned to have the roof be a landing pad for Zeppelins, which never in a million years would have worked, but they have similar stories at like the Empire State Building, planned like Zeppelin docking stations. Because it was the 1920s. There was always going to be somebody on the board of directors going, you know what, we got to have Zeppelins. Why, in 20 years, everybody's going to be flying around in Zeppelins. If we don't have a landing pad, why, we shall be obsolete. Blocking our view of that now, the 1927 by Howells and Hoods, the Chicago Tribune building, actually the home of the Chicago Tribune until just a few years ago. It is now, of course, gone condo. Well, all right, everybody. That's a bit of an abbreviated version of the tour. I've got to leave you wanting more, so I'm save a few of the jokes for the proper tours in the fall. But that gets me a little bit more warmed up. I might pick up a shift or two just to stay in practice, and a couple extra bucks. But quick plug for some upcoming events. On June 15th, a week from today, it's finally here, everybody. Grave Robbing 102. We are going to be looking at the Great Merchant Caper, in which a couple of ghouls took Manhattan and stole the body of A.T. Seward, the retailer who inspired people like Potter Palmer and Marshall Field later on. His bones may or may not have ever been recovered. We're going to go in great depth on that. I just went to St. Mark's in the Bowery where the vault was, talked to the director there. She was terrific. And next in-person one, there's only a few tickets left this Sunday afternoon, but we will be at Rose Hill Cemetery here in Chicago for an in-person walking tour. Go to adamchicago.com for all of the details there. And with that, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago. We'll put the Benny Goodman back on, and we will just hang out.
Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. And now Benny Goodman's arrangement of The Bugle Call Rang.
Thanks, Kathleen. Picked this up at Richard's Fabulous Finds some time ago. For Grave Robbing 102, you will need a lantern. You will need a shovel. You still need shovels, even though this is a vault burial. You will need some rope, and you will need some really good rubber bags that seal really well. And some copies of the New York Herald. Why is it called the Flatiron Building? Because it is in the shape of an iron. Casey, Pier 54. Thank you, Tracy. Lane, sorry to hear that. No, Dana, this is just one that I got from the discos section of Richard's Fabulous Finds. Gotta get down to Shakedown Street. Used to be the heart of town. Don't tell me this town ain't got no heart. I can hear it beat out loud. If I appear out of sync to you, your best option is probably to restart. I have been drinking an old-fashioned all night. It's a good night for celebrating. You might have guessed I've been partaking today. I really thought I would have worked it all out of my system by the time the tour started. Thanks, Jennifer. Now, do not adjust your television. We control the vertical. We control the horizontal. We don't control the cat. I'm going to go find Miles. There we go.
And that would put rhythm in the feet of
Hey, everybody, if you can't go see Heather's band.
Paul Ragg, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
There's the guy. They are all competing for attention right now. The three cats seem to be getting along. Lily is here for an unknown period of time, but she's worked her way into the group. I still haven't seen her cuddling with either of the two, or sitting in the same space at the same time for a prolonged period, but she joined Miles in a game of horse stampede yesterday. That's right, Miles. Oh, someone on Twitter says, "You are sickening and a hater. You should not be praising the actions of Biden's Gestapo, FBI, intended to take down a duly elected American, blah, 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 blah. $5, I find something anti-vax within a minute of scrolling their feed." Let's see. They only tweeted like 4 times ever. Yep. Mm-hmm. I'll call this Chicago Teachers Union Marxist. The Marxist CTU. Oh, that's hilarious. Oh, there's a racial slur. I'm surprised I've gotten this far without some anti-queer stuff. No, anti-trans stuff. Wow. Yeah, my rips on Pat Robertson today brought some interesting people out of the woodwork. Mm-hmm. All over town. It's just so predictable when I look them up. Octavia, is today the first anniversary of your first live in-person tour? That would have been what, the one I did just for the Patreons? That sounds about right. I would have thought that was in May. Doreen, I'm not sure about tomorrow. I will be out and about. July 13th. Huh, what day of the week is that, besides being my birthday? I would like to work on my birthday. Yeah, on the 13th it'll just be a virtual tour, I'm sure. It'll be on a Thursday. Where is Priya? Good question. I don't know where Priya is right now. I have a couple of theories. She's probably on Aiden's bed right now. I gotta do tomorrow's Patreon post, too. It was all cut up until tomorrow. Miles. Hey, Peter. Oh, hey. Good to see ya.
Benny Goodman presents On the Alamo.
How many people will be in the New York City cemetery book? I don't have a number on that yet, Carol. Interesting thing is St. Mark's, though, where A.T. Stewart was stolen from, they also have Petrus Stuyvesant's grave. And the director told me they've recently established the names of some of the people that Stuyvesant enslaved who are now in the tomb with him. So I can give them the top building. I can make it, in the book, it'll be their tomb. And he's just also there. Dinner's a bit stalled right now, Bob. Still in the works, but finding a way to do them cost effectively is a trick. If you're new around here, there is a page, Mysterious Chicago Regulars and Miles Fan Club. Here's Miles. Miles, you know you got a fan club, right? You got to meet some of the fans. I was interested to see what other pictures I've got set up in here. Oh yeah, here's this thing from the microfilm room about the wickedest districts. Fine panorama. What was this one? Oh yeah, this whole thing was up on the Patreon a while ago. This whole theater review. Not too much on this one.
And we stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny Goodman.
Good night, Gina.
And hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo.
Pub crawl for my birthday sounds like the way to go. We'll see. I haven't really started to think about, it just kind of occurred to me now, oh yeah, my birthday's in like a month. I really stopped to think about it at a time, you know, when you're over 11. But alright, everybody. Quick plug once again for the upcoming tours. Coming up, we got Grave Robbing 102, The Great Merchant Caper, and Rose Hill Cemetery. So, alright, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining me. That's the saying, high and low. I'll see you all in the morning for Find a Grave Friday, and until then, everybody, stay safe, stay strong, and of course, if you can, stay spooky, everybody.